Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and this is a one-on-one interview. I am joined by David McDonnell, the Manchester Football Correspondent for the Daily Mirror. How are you doing?
All right, Joe. How are you?
Very well, thank you. We're going to be going through, pretty much everything about Manchester United. We'll be looking at the ownership stuff. We want some timelines. I want some dates. We don't know what's going on. It seems like it was happening this week and now it's being pushed around. There's been rumours on transfers, a lot of more outs than ins. Varane, Sancho, all sorts. We're also looking at maybe a new centre-back coming in and a little injury update for the weekend ahead as well, if all of that sounds good to you.
Can we pad that into the time we've got?
Yeah, we can squash all that in easy. Let's start with the ownership stuff. Obviously, this is the biggest change to United sort of above football or above the manager's staff in nearly 20 years now. The first time we've seen real big change since the Glazers took over. Firstly, do you expect this deal to be done within the next week? Because a couple of weeks ago it was it'll all be done and dusted during the international break, and now we're hearing it might be pushing on, it might be going another week or two. Like, what's going on?
Well, that was our understanding, that it would be done during the international break, and that was, we're in the international break now, but about a couple of weeks ago that was the intel that everyone was getting, that it was going to be done in the next fortnight. Now it looks like it's going to be pushed back until the new year. But I think you've seen with the departure of Richard Arnold that Sir Jim Ratcliffe has not been slow in asserting his authority and flexing his muscles, if you like. So I don't think there's any doubt that it's going to go through. It's just a question of the process and the ratifying of certain paperwork and official elements of the deal. But we expect it to go through probably, well, again, it's a year tomorrow since the Glazers announced that the club was, they were exploring strategic review, which includes, new investment, a sale, and other avenues, to kind of benefit the company. So it's a year ago tomorrow. So this has been dragging on for 12 months now. So I don't think anyone, however much they think they're in the know, can put a timeline on it and can say for definite that's going to happen then. All we can say is that the latest information is that it was going to happen this week, and now it looks likely to probably push on until the new year. And it's not obviously the outcome that fans wanted. They obviously wanted a full sale. That's not been possible at this stage. But I do think that Sir Jim Ratcliffe's 25% stake is, as has been widely reported and widely accepted, the first step in a eventual takeover of the entire club. Yeah,
and it seems as well that there's more than one type of 25% stake, isn't there? There's you own 25% and not a lot else. Whereas this seems like it's a 25% stake with a lot of control associated with it that you wouldn't always necessarily have with that 25%.
No, you kind of have 25% and be a kind of silent partner, a sleeping partner in that sense. But no, you're right, Joe. Sir Jim Ratcliffe has been very vocal in terms of, well, if I'm going to buy in a quarter of Manchester United, I want control of the football operations. I want to, turn this ailing club around, if you like, and I want to make my own appointments, and I want to have control of basically the sporting side of it. And the Glazers have obviously acquiesced to that and said, fine, that's the caveat, that's the demand, then you'll have that control. And we've seen that again with the departure of Richard Arnold, or the imminent departure of Richard Arnold. He's going to the end of the year, I think. And obviously with John Murtough as well, which looks likely, that he will follow Richard Arnold out the door. And you have to ask yourself, if you're going to buy 25% of any football club, be it Manchester United or any other club, why would you not want to have some sort of control? And also if you're buying into a club like Manchester United, who have historically over the last 10 years underperformed in the transfer market and on the pitch, why wouldn't you want to change that, change the personnel at the top? Because if you leave the status quo as it is, you're just accepting the failings of the past and accepting that these people can carry on in roles where they have underperformed. And John Murtaugh's only been in the job a couple of years, made some shrewd signings, but if you look at all the signings made under his watch in the last couple of years, they haven't all come off.
No,
there's been if you're being brutally honest, they've overpaid for players. Anthony, a prime example, who's nowhere near worth 82 million, and he's been there a season and a half, if you like. So he's had plenty of time to bed in. So I think Jim Ratcliffe has obviously come in, and part of the bidding process back in March, when he and the Qatari bidders were granted access to the books, was to look at the whole operation, be that the football side, the commercial side, ticketing, merchandise, whatever, the whole business side of Manchester United. And he's clearly concluded, and his team have concluded, that things have to change on the football side.
It would be slightly bizarre and weird if he came in and went, everything's great.
Yeah.
That would be the saddest moment of all, wouldn't it? If he comes in and goes, no, business as usual.
Yeah.
It'd be funny, like you said before, about we don't expect anything to go wrong with this transition now. But wouldn't it be slightly funny if Richard Arnold quit and then the Murtaugh takeover didn't happen, and then Richard, why did someone?
He's in limbo then.
I would have stayed if I'd have known. But obviously, like you said, if the CEO has announced he's leaving, that's because changes are going to happen, isn't it? Just on some sort of specifics, obviously, Richard Arnold, there's talks of Jean-Claude Blanc coming in. He seems to be really the only name mentioned with the CEO role that I've seen. But underneath that, there seems to be a lot more sort of conjecture and opinion. Yeah. We've seen Paul Mitchell, we've seen Dougie Friedman, then there's people across Europe, slightly lesser known names as well. Do you have a sort of an idea of who you think the director of football will be? Do we think it will be just an exact sort of replica of the current system where it's, John Murtaugh, Arnold, owners, or do you think there could be more people added in there? Is there any indication on that?
I would expect change again, as I said, just now. They have to change the philosophy, they have to change the approach, they have to change the structure, the whole structure. Now, the names you mentioned, Dougie Friedman, obviously, is one name, Paul Mitchell. I don't think any of us, if we're being brutally honest, know who they actually have identified at the moment. But we certainly expect Sir Dave Brailsford to come on board, because obviously he's been the kind of director of sport for Ineos under Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and he's someone who trusts, someone who he places a lot of faith in terms of the strategy. So I expect him to get a prominent role at Manchester United, as a kind of overlord, if you like. Yeah. But as far as the structure goes, no, I don't think we have any hard information on that at the moment. But I would expect them to want to change the whole approach, because it's not worked for 10 years, has it? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, look at Manchester United's net spend over the last decade. I mean, they've spent more than anybody else, including Manchester City, who've won 6 titles in that time, and United haven't won the league in that time. And they spent more than anybody, but for a lesser return. So I think that's chiefly what Sir Jim Ratcliffe and his team have looked at and said, this has just been an absolute, disaster in terms of money. I mean, even Richard Arnold mentioned it when he was, covertly filmed by the fans in that Cheshire pub. What was that? June last year, I think, when he said we've burned through $1 billion. And am I happy where the money's gone? No. So even in an off-guarded moment, and you can debate the rights and wrongs of, whether he was, it was fair game to be recorded that way. Even the man at the top of Manchester United, was admitting that they've wasted £1 billion. Yeah. So there has to be serious change. And I think, again, as much as fans, wanted to see the back of the Glazers, this is the best possible scenario. Once Sheikh Jassim had walked away, and we can obviously debate the morals of Qataris, potential ownership. But once that bid had gone, I think this is the best possible outcome, because it's just creeping into the Glazers' shareholdings, and as I say, it's probably the first step into Jim Ratcliffe eventually gaining overall control of the club, and the fans seeing the back of the Glazers once and for all, which is what they want. Yeah, definitely. And I do think that it got to the point where it became clear the Glazers didn't want to sell a controlling portion of Manchester United. They weren't willing to do that. Yeah, there's a lot of debate within the family about that. Yeah. A couple of them, were desperate to sell. And I think Joel and Avram weren't happy to sell. I think that was what it boiled down to. So there was conflict within the family over, are we going for a full sale or are we going to go for a partial sale? So that's led us to this situation where Jim Ratcliffe's got 25%. Yeah, and like you said, once you accept the fact, even though it's hard to accept, that they weren't going to sell the full, control of the club, this, like you said, is probably the best case scenario from that point, isn't it? Yeah, where they're losing a lot of control of how the actual football inside is ran. Yeah. By the sound of it, some control over the commercial side as well, even though it's the football inside. If you've got Jean-Claude Blanc coming in as CEO, the CEO has a hand in the marketing and the commercial side as well. So they're giving away probably as much control as we could have hoped for the percentage of ownership they've sold, if you know what I mean. You said it much more eloquently than I could have. I barely got it out by the end. Just lastly on this, before we move on to some transfer stuff, Ten Hag is obviously probably the biggest sort of public-facing piece that they could change if they really wanted to come in, assert that a new era at Manchester United, change the manager. We've seen owners do that time and time again. Do you think that will happen, and do you think the fans would accept that if it did happen? I think your second point is absolutely why they won't do that. Right. Because I don't think there'll be any acceptance of the fans because I think the fans, despite the results this season, despite was it 9 defeats in 18 games or something like that? Yeah. I mean, despite the problems on the pitch, I think the fans have remained behind Ten Hag. certainly some of the players haven't performed, but I think they saw last season that there was a strategy, a philosophy in place from Ten Hag. Some of the football wasn't great, but he ended the 6-year wait for a trophy with the Carabao Cup. He got United back into the Champions League with a third place finish. The fans are behind Ten Hag, and I think Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos and all the people around him are mindful of that if you suddenly come in and start changing the manager when most of the fans, or the majority of the fans, are behind the manager, I don't think that would be a prudent move. I think they know that Ten Hag, with the right backing, I mean, let's be honest, Ten Hag wanted Harry Kane this summer, didn't get him because United were reluctant to get into a bidding war with Tottenham or deal with Daniel Levy, so they went for Rasmus Højlund. Now, Rasmus Højlund has shown certainly a lot of promise in his games, but I think what the point I'm trying to make is that if there's a new regime in charge and Ten Hag can say, right, I want that player, and that regime will say, right, we'll stop at nothing to get that player, because this is Manchester United after all. It's not, they should be able to go out and get the very best players in the world. I think once that happens, I think Ten Hag's been compromised a little bit by not getting his first choices. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And I think with a new regime in charge, and hopefully, they will give him more freedom to pursue the players he wants rather than go 2 or 3 down the list in terms of his targets. I think that's why they'll probably keep him there, because I think they can probably see that he's onto something. Yeah. And also, changing managers hasn't worked, has it, in the 10 years? Let's be honest. That cycle, that churn of manager every 2 or 3 years, with Moyes, then with Van Gaal, Mourinho, Solskjaer, it's just not worked. So I think you do need a period of stability, and hopefully he gets that. I'm sure he will get that. I mean, obviously results dictate that. If they continue to lose and underperform, then he'll be under pressure.
I think as well, if you look at it from a sort of medium to long term perspective, you look at Ratcliffe coming in and Dave Brailsford, who are obsessed with the details and making things sort of scientific and
very
technical.
Forensic in their approach. Yeah.
If you're conducting a scientific experiment about what works and what doesn't, changing 4 or 5 different ingredients at a time isn't going to tell you. You almost have to change, right, the CEO and the sporting director, that doesn't work, let's change that. Yeah. Does that work now? Okay, either that does or it doesn't. If it doesn't, maybe the manager needs to go. Yeah. But if you just change everything, you almost can't tell, is it the new manager that's making the CEO look good, or is it like, you almost need to change one increment at a time to sort of fully analyse the system and whether it works. So we also saw it at Chelsea, getting Tuchel out didn't help. No. It immediately put Potter on the back foot. It immediately put extra pressure on him, and then that crumbled in front of everyone's eyes. Yeah. And it set Chelsea back. Last season, I think, set Chelsea back 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I would agree.
So you have to do these things right. And even look at Birmingham now. Not massively keen on Wayne Rooney because their previous manager had started winning games.
Yeah. Well, they were 4th or 5th when he took
they're
over.
in the playoffs.
And he's lost 5 now, isn't he, Rooney? I think.
Yeah. So these, you need to think about the foundations that a manager is coming into.
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem they've identified, Ineos, is not with the manager. It's the recruitment, and it's the people that have been put in charge of making that recruitment and making those decisions. And I think their belief is that once that changes, again we come back to the structure. Once the personnel and the structure changes, the rest of it flows from that, and success will hopefully come from that. But you've got to get the structure right before anything else, because if you're signing the wrong players, I mean, we could debate all day here about Casemiro had a great first season, but now he's injured long term. But was it wise signing a player for 70 million at 30, 31?
I mean, just if you look at that as an equation, it's typically not a good equation, is it? 30 years plus long contract plus big money. Yeah, typically isn't a success. I think he was very good last season, but now there are rumours of him
go to Saudi. That's a rumour that he'll certainly. I mean, the Saudis have come out this week, and the Saudi Pro League have come out and said that they will stop at nothing to target the very best players. And okay, Casemiro might be past his prime, but he's still a huge name, and it'll be a huge coup for them to get him. They're going to try and get Salah again, probably not in January, but certainly in the summer. All these players, Son at Tottenham, they're going to probably try and make a concerted effort to get. So they're trying to cherry pick the very best players, and Casemiro is a prime example of that.
Another player then that is potentially on the way out, rumours about Varane and a conversation with Bayern Munich, and again, like we hear with every conversation surrounding a Manchester United player, the wages are the big issue. The wages, we'd like to sign him, but the wages, we'll get to Sancho in a minute, but I can already tell you the word wages are going to be mentioned about 30 times, because whenever any well-run club wants to buy a United player, they go, what's he on? Like, why is he on 3 times what anyone else would pay for him? So
we come back to the football side of it. People, chief executives and the football board, John Murtagh, Richard Arnold, and Ed Woodward before them, handing out these contracts long contracts on absurdly high wages. And you can't shift these players because, as you say, no one can afford to foot the bill. So United end up. I mean, that's another thing where United have really struggled. Where City, and Chelsea, in fairness, I know Chelsea spent an astronomical amount, but they've certainly recouped a lot of money. Yeah. With sales of Havertz, Rudiger, Kovacic. United don't sell well. They can't shift players. And that's another element that it's not just the recruitment of bringing players in; it's the inability to get players out. Yeah. City, I mean, so Mahrez, Gundogan was a free, but Mahrez in the summer to the Saudis for 30 million. Laporte went to the Saudis for 30 million. Yeah. You'll probably have another player there.
I remember there was a table of in the last decade, how much teams had made from player sales. Yeah. And these are ballpark figures because I don't have it in front of me, but Chelsea's was something like 700 million quid. Yeah. City's was about 500, Liverpool's was about 450. United's was like 290 million. It was almost a third of what Chelsea's is. Our ability to sell players is just a disaster, really.
And that's a legacy of having players, as you just said, on long contracts, on too much money. And you can't get rid of them. If they're 2 years into a 5-year contract, and they're on 200 grand a week, who's going to pay that? And so they struggled. I mean, Maguire's a classic example. He's moved to West Ham, fell through, but that players aren't going to go. Where they're going to get paid less, and why should they? No. They've got the security of a contract, so I can see it from their point of view. I mean, fans probably have a different perspective, Yeah. But if you're a player, you're thinking, well, why am I going there for half the money? You can understand it, and that's not the player's fault. That's the fault of the club.
And just on the Casemiro thing as well, that was made sort of public, wasn't it? This idea that Jim Ratcliffe in particular
that was one transfer.
Spoke about that transfer as one, like you said, just as a formula. Yeah. Don't make transfers like this. But again, it came from we couldn't get De Jong. Yeah. We just lost to Brighton and Brentford back to back in embarrassing fashion. Yeah. Completely dominated by Brentford. Or where was it? 3-0, 3-1, something 4-1, like that. Was it? 4-1. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Terrible. And then we went, we need a midfielder. Yeah. Let's go and get Casemiro. So it came from. He's a good player. He was very good last season. We wouldn't have won the Carabao without him. All that being said, just the maths on that transfer
doesn't stack up.
Doesn't add up, does it? And it came from panic and the inability to either get De Jong out of Barcelona or to realise early on we weren't going to be able to get him. Yeah. That's people think, we couldn't get De Jong, so we need to. Yeah, but why didn't we realise early at the start of July that we couldn't get De Jong?
Because that whole transfer saga lasted the entire window.
Exactly.
And then I think it was August 28th. It was where he was paraded in front of the fans at the day of the Liverpool game, wasn't he? Yeah. Which United won, obviously. But yeah, it was so late in the window that it smacked of a panic buy. Yeah. But it was a panic buy.
It was. And same with Anthony. We just got a note on the screen just correcting us that it was actually 4-0 to Brentford. So even worse than we remembered. Thanks for that, producer Ethan. 4-0 actually.
Can't even give you a goal.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, him and Anthony both came in after those games. Yeah. Both for fees that were well in excess of probably what they were worth. Certainly Anthony.
Well, I think United have been quoted. I mean, the irony of that Anthony deal, I think we were told that the figure was about 40-50 million. United will obviously dispute that. But there was no competition for him. No one else was in for him. And they suddenly ended up paying 82 million. Yeah.
Because we waited till the end of the window when they'd already sold their sort of allotted amount of players and didn't want to sell any more. Yeah. Just moving on a little bit then, the Ratcliffe sort of intervention, if you want to call it that, on the footballing side, we're expecting that it might take a little while for things to be fully signed off and boxes ticked, and everyone, the reports are Ratcliffe wouldn't be able to sort of stamp his authority on this until then. Yeah. But obviously, if it's done and it's agreed, he's going to be in the room. He's going to be part of these conversations. Yeah. Maybe he can't officially buy players and sell players. No. But Richard Arnold's already left.
Well, that's what I was going to make that point.
Yeah. Do you think he could have a say, and his team could have a say on January, even if it's just in terms of targets, or are we looking toward the summer for that?
No, I would think so. But United traditionally don't do a lot of business in January. No. I mean, just because the right players, the players of the requisite quality, aren't available. So I don't think you'll see much movement incomings in January, if I'm being honest. I think you're more likely to see them adopt more of a longer term strategy and try and identify targets for the summer. That's when you can get the players you want, the big name players, the players that are going to make a huge difference. The players signed in January are traditionally kind of stopgaps, aren't they? Just trying to get you to the end of the season, or fill holes through because of injuries and that kind of thing. So I think there'll be a longer term approach. But I think you'll see some outgoings. I mean, you said we were going to talk about Sancho. I think he's one player that I can't see a way back for at United because of the fallout with Ten Hag and his intransigence. He's dug his heels in. He's not going to apologise. Ten Hag has certainly the kind of bedrock of his tenure so far has been discipline, conformity. You saw last season when Rashford overslept and missed a team, was late for a team meeting. Yep. He got dropped for the Wolves game, and that was a brave call by Ten Hag, because obviously at the time he was only 30 goals last season. He was the leading scorer, but regardless of reputation, we saw it with Ronaldo last season as well. Regardless of reputation, you all have to conform to the same rules. So I think, going back to the question, I think you'll probably see Sancho go, maybe Casemiro, but I don't think United can afford, with the injuries they've got, to lose that many players.
No.
The squad's not plentiful, if for want of a better word. It's not deep. So I think there'll be more outgoings than incomings rather. And I think it'll only be maybe 2 or 3 potentially.
Yeah. Varane's another one that's been mentioned a lot. He seems to have fallen out of favour with Ten Hag, even though he was one of the first names on the team sheet last season alongside Martinez. Ten Hag talks about it being a sort of partnerships thing, where if he wants to play Maguire on the right and he can't do that with Varane. But when you're not starting a bloke who's won 4 Champions Leagues and is one of the best, I mean, you could argue he's one of the better centre-backs in history, looking at his CV. He's only 30. He's not starting for Man United. Yeah. How does that end well?
Well, it doesn't, does it? I think he'll be thinking about his future. He'll be thinking, well, is this a temporary situation or long term? I mean, I think obviously Johnny Evans being out now for 3 or 4 weeks opens the door for Varane. But of course, you've got Lindelof there, who's been preferred ahead of him. Yeah. So I think it's with the best one in the world, Johnny Evans, has been a great servant to Manchester United, but he's 35, I think, in January. Yeah. And you would ordinarily have Varane in over Johnny Evans. Just because any day of the week, because of his experience and because of his, just as his
even just the levels they've been at in their career.
Exactly. Just the experience level, age,
Champions
everything.
Leagues every week.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Varane got 4 Champions Leagues, I think. World Cup winner with France.
World Cup winner, got to another final last year.
So I think he would be questioning that. He'd be thinking, hang on, how is this guy who left this club 9 years ago, went to West Brom, then Leicester, and has come in ostensibly as a kind of cover, is now ahead of me in the pecking order. So he'll be questioning his future, and why wouldn't he? Because he's not playing, and at 30 years old, you want to be playing. I mean, the noises from Varane's camp is that no, he understands Ten Hag's approach, but players, behind the scenes, they say one thing publicly, or the representatives say one thing publicly. Behind the scenes, they're thinking differently. Yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me if he was, trying to engineer a way out maybe in January, unless he sees that with Johnny Evans now out for a period of 3 or 4 weeks, that may reopen the door for him to come back in again. But it doesn't say a great deal about Erik Ten Hag's faith in him, that when he's fit and able to play, he's on the bench.
I know. I wonder if it is an injury-related thing as well, because you get to the point where you struggle to rely on Varane, don't you? He misses a quarter to a third of every season he's been here. Well,
I was told that by someone within United that Ten Hag at the moment is relying on a core of players that he can trust. And I think that's an interesting word, that trust. Yeah. It gives the impression that, well, not the impression, but it lets you know that he doesn't trust Varane. Now, whether that's in terms of injuries and fitness, or whether it's in terms of performance level, but he clearly trusts Maguire, he trusts Evans, he trusts. I mean, the results haven't borne out that trust. Let's be honest. No. But at the moment, that's his approach. He's concentrating on a core of players that he feels he can trust. And that doesn't include Varane at the moment.
And things have picked up slightly in the last couple of weeks, haven't they? In the league especially.
Domestically, the 2 clean sheets, 2 1-0 wins, Fulham and Luton. Yeah. Of course, Copenhagen, the 4-3 defeat. I mean,
bizarre though, wasn't it?
Yeah, very, very, very strange.
Another player looking at that back line is Onana. There was reports of an injury while he's been away for playing with Cameroon. Yeah. Any updates on that?
Well, my understanding is that he will be fit. He's not playing against Libya tonight, Tuesday. I don't know what day we're on. Tuesday. We've got a World Cup qualifier. So he's flown back to Manchester. I think he flew back yesterday. It's a back injury. I think it was initially a sort of described as a pelvic injury, but I'm told it's a back injury. That he felt some pain on about 81 minutes into that 3-0 win over Mauritius. But it was a precautionary measure. I don't think it's anything serious. So to all intents and purposes, he should be fit to face Everton on Sunday. But of course, he's got Alti Bayindir behind him, who's desperate to prove himself. We all thought he might have got a look in the Carabao Cup. Of course, United got knocked out by Newcastle. Yeah. But he's had to wait, and so it's going to be interesting. But I think Onana will make it, and I think Ten Hag has put so much faith in him that it'd be desperate for him to be fit for that game at Goodison.
In terms of that, Bayindir and that dynamic there,
Yeah.
there's the African Cup of Nations coming up, which when we bought Onana didn't seem to be an issue. He'd retired from international football.
Yeah.
Now he's back playing from the other day, so he's in the squad, he's in the team.
Yeah.
All indication would be that he's going to go to that. Do you think he will go? And in terms of Bayindir and his ability to sort of back up Onana, what's the understanding there?
Well, Onana, I was at the World Cup a year ago when he fell out with Rigobert Song and was sent home. It was over the style of play, and he was a bit too maverick for him. He didn't want to take too many risks and such like. So, yeah, when United signed him, I think it was on the understanding that he wouldn't be going to the African nations because, as you say, retired. I think he's under pressure from the Cameroon Football Federation and, if you like, the Cameroon government, because he's such a big figure, big presence for them, that they want him to play. And now he's back in the fold. It's very difficult for him to turn his back on Cameroon again. So I think he's under huge pressure, and I don't think we should underestimate that pressure that he's under personally. And he's torn, obviously, because he's desperate. He's had a difficult start to his Manchester United career. Lots of high-profile mistakes against Bayern Munich, Galatasaray. Yeah. I'm sure there's one or two others in there as well.
Yeah, I don't need to worry about those.
But we'll gloss over those.
Pretend it's just the Bayern Munich and Galatasaray.
But I think in recent weeks, he's got 4, it's not many, but 4 clean sheets in the Premier League.
He's looked a lot better recently.
Yeah, joint second behind Nick Pope, I think. His save percentage is something like 75-6%, third best in the Premier League. So I think his distribution's got better with his feet, which is what he was primarily bought for. Yeah. But yeah, in January there's going to be not in January, before January, there's a huge decision to make. And people I talk to at United, they rave about Altay Bayindir, and he's not just a kind of a number 2 by name. He's desperate to prove himself, and I think he's a keeper of real quality who, if Onana does, as we suspect, go to the African Cup of Nations, and Bayindir has to come in. If Bayindir performs well, then Ten Hag will be under pressure to keep him. If he's as good as everyone at United raves about him, the goalkeeping staff, people within the club. I think they tried to get him last year, and that's how good he is. So they've been monitoring him for a while, and of course Onana will probably be thinking in the back of his mind, he's not really convinced, even though Ten Hag's put faith in him or shown faith in him. If he goes to the African Cup of Nations and is away for the maximum amount of games, which I think is 6 now, United are out of the League Cup, and Bayindir does well, he might struggle to get his place back, because why would you change a team where a keeper's performing consistently, which hasn't been the case with Onana, albeit he's done better recently. So there's a real dilemma there for Onana, and I think, as I say, he's under pressure from lots of external forces, and would probably rather, it's my opinion, probably rather stay and really cement his place for Manchester United. Yeah. But I think we'll end up seeing him go.
Yeah, I think we will as well. But hopefully, if by the sounds of what you're saying, Bayindir is a worthy backup, if not slightly more than that, then that'd be great, wouldn't it? I mean, you don't want to be in an Arsenal situation where you've got 2 number 1s, but Romero was fantastic for United.
I was going to say that's the example. I was going to. He's the Europa League keeper, wasn't he, under Mourinho? Yeah. So it has worked before, but Ten Hag's been reluctant so far to give Bayindir a go, because he wants Onana to bed in and develop his understanding with the defence. But then, of course, the defence has been all over the place.
He's not had one defence 2 games in a row yet, has he? I don't think.
So that plan has kind of backfired through no fault of Ten Hag's.
Yeah. Just looking slightly further ahead then, we've got, obviously Ratcliffe's going to be overseeing it, but then we've got Ten Hag looking at this as well. A few contracts that are going to be sort of expiring, or could expire if we don't have the optional extra years on there.
Martial?
I was going to start with Martial, yeah. Surely we've seen enough of Martial at Manchester United now.
Yeah, I would have said so. I mean, how long has it been? Is it?
I think it's
9 years.
Let's have a look. Yeah, something like that. It was
2015. Sorry,
15 he signed, wasn't it? So,
when he came on and made his debut against Liverpool, scored that incredible goal in that 3-1 win. I think everyone had huge, high hopes for him. Yeah. But it's just, where do you start with Martial? All the talent, but just either, doesn't want to, or doesn't feel that there's just, I can't really explain it. I mean, he's got the talent. You see it in bursts. You see it, flashes of it, throughout the season, but he can't put it together in a consistent run. And I think there's a mental issue with Martial as well, with injuries as well. If he's not 100% fit, he can't play. Mourinho touched upon it. Mourinho wanted to get rid of him, didn't he? Back in 2016, 17, I think it was, 18. I think Martial, whether they take the option up, I can't see them doing that, to be honest. He's been on loan, hasn't he? He went to Seville. Yeah. He got 1 goal, or maybe didn't score at all. I can't remember.
1 goal, but not. It was a cup game, I think. Yeah.
So you'd have hoped that a fresh start somewhere else might have, been the jolt he needed, but that hasn't worked.
No.
Ten Hag's always said, and I cannot agree with him on this, that Manchester United are a better team when Martial's in it. But until they got Højlund, I mean, Højlund gives you 10 times what Martial does in terms of his work ethic, his ability to run, the pressing of defences, everything that Martial doesn't bring to the team, he brings. Okay, hasn't scored in the Premier League yet, but I think it's a matter of time. So I can't see them. I mean, they might exercise the option just to protect his market value and try and get some money for him, in January or whenever. But I think we've seen. I think he'd be on his way as quick as possible. Yeah,
he's not scored in the league yet, Højlund.
No,
and yet his goals in the Champions League have already outscored Martial in 2 of the last 4 years in all competitions. So yes, he's not
5 goals in Europe.
Yeah, 5 goals, and Martial's got 1 so far this season. He got 9 last season, 1 the year before that, and 7 the year before that. So he's outscoring Martial even without scoring, which is quite the stat.
I'll use that one. Thank you.
Another couple of players, just quickly. Victor Lindelof is another one. He seems to be quite keen on Victor Lindelof, but. Do you think that we can expect sort of big changes next summer? I know obviously we don't quite know. I mean, we might get an interview out of Jim Ratcliffe that might clear up some of this. But do you expect there to be a big transition now? Do you think a big change is coming for United, or do you see this as more of an evolution?
A bit of both. I mean, the big change is needed, but it doesn't happen overnight, does it? It has to happen, over time. So I think it will be an evolution. I think what they'll want to do, and this goes back to what we talked about earlier in the conversation, is get rid of all those players on contracts, the kind of legacy players like Martial's who just hanging around the place, if you like, if you want a better phrase.
Yeah.
Get rid of them. Get rid of players that just aren't delivering on their contracts. But you can't obviously get rid of everybody that you think is not up to scratch. You've got to evolve the squad. So I think it'll be a slow process, but I expect there to be a far more rigorous approach in terms of transfers, in terms of getting value for money, in terms of doing what City have done and Liverpool have done and Arsenal have done, buying well, selling well, not lavishing great sums on players who are clearly the best days are behind them, and put them on long-term contracts where they're just going to be hard to get rid of. Again, we're in that cycle going back to what we were talking about earlier. But these things take time, and I think as much as Jim Ratcliffe, and his team want to, completely overhaul everything, they're going to find out that it takes time, that these mistakes of the past are going to take a lot of time to unpick and put right. That's why I don't think we'll see any radical ins or outs in January, but I think we'll see 3 or 4 big signings, hopefully, in summer, and obviously with players coming to the end of their contracts being moved on.
Right. Thank you very much.
All right.
I've really enjoyed chatting with you.
We flew through that.
It was good. 30 minutes has gone. It's flown by, hasn't it?
It was good fun.
It was really good fun. Thank you for coming on. Make sure you hit subscribe to the channel. Also, check out David as well at Disco Mirror on Twitter. We'll put the link to that in the description. Check out his work on the Daily Mirror, of course. Thank you for joining us. Like I said before, hit subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. This has been a one-on-one interview with David McDonnell, the Manchester correspondent for the Daily Mirror. We'll see you in a bit.